Hello, dear listeners, and welcome to our channel. Here, you'll find the most enchanting tales, woven with magic, wonder, and adventure, to help you drift off to sleep with a smile. So, get cozy, relax, and let yourself be transported to a world of fairy tales. Tonight, we'll be sharing the story of Cinderella. Sit back, listen closely, and enjoy. Cinderella. Once upon a time, in a distant land where a majestic royal castle towered on the horizon, there lived a man. It had been many years since he lost his beloved wife, leaving him with a beautiful daughter whom he cherished deeply. She had a kind heart, just like her late mother, and approached every task with joy and a willingness to help anyone in need. The man, however, was preparing to marry again. His bride-to-be was a proud and spiteful woman who masked her true nature with sweetness and charm, making the man believe she was a loving and kind-hearted person. But as soon as the wedding celebrations ended, her true character was revealed, arrogant and cruel. Unfortunately, her two daughters, Nina and Lena, were just as bad. They despised any kind of work and spent most of their days admiring themselves in the mirror. From the very first day, the stepmother treated her new stepdaughter with disdain and harshness. She couldn't bear that the girl was both more beautiful and more capable than her own daughters. Together, the three of them turned her into their servant. Not only did they demand she wait on them hand and foot, brushing their hair, tending to their every whim, as though they were queens, but they also assigned her the dirtiest and most exhausting chores. Her days were so full of work that she hardly ever stepped outside. One moment she was scrubbing piles of dirty dishes, the next mopping floors, cooking, sewing, or sweeping ashes from the hearth. Her face was constantly smudged with soot, yet it did nothing to diminish her natural beauty. "You filthy girl! Look at yourself, covered in ash again. Even your clothes are a mess. You look like a real Cinderella," the stepmother sneered one day. From then on, that's what they called her, Cinderella. And sometimes, they called her even worse names, like Cindersoot. The stepsisters immediately took all of her lovely dresses and left her with only two old rags. They even forced her out of her own room, leaving her to sleep in a neglected, dusty corner of the house, while Nina and Lena enjoyed lavishly furnished bedrooms and soft, luxurious bedding. Every morning, Cinderella had to wake her stepsisters and cater to their every demand as though she were their personal maid. Cinderella's father, blinded by his new wife's charm, was utterly under her control. The stepmother manipulated him so thoroughly that he did whatever she asked, leaving his daughter to fend for herself. One day, an invitation arrived at the house for the grand royal ball, where the young prince was to choose his bride. The entire household erupted with excitement. Nina and Lena began arguing over which dresses and jewelry they would wear to captivate the prince. They constantly competed over who had the more beautiful hat or necklace, while Cinderella scrubbed the dirty floors. If she missed even the tiniest spot, she was immediately scolded. To lighten the burden of her exhausting work, Cinderella often sang while she cleaned, and all the birds in the trees around the house joined in her melody. Of course, Cinderella was overjoyed by the invitation, too. She dreamed of attending the royal ball and seeing the prince with her own eyes. But her stepmother quickly crushed her hopes. "Oh, Cinderella, don't be ridiculous. The prince wouldn't waste a moment looking at such a mess. Just look at you, all covered in filth, her stepmother snapped. Nina, did you hear that? Our little Cinderella wants to go to the royal ball. Nina sneered, her voice dripping with mockery, before bursting into raucous laughter. She could go to sweep up the cobwebs, I suppose, Nina giggled, joining in the taunts. Cinderella's heart sank, overcome with sadness at the cruel treatment. Cinderella, stop dreaming and make sure all your chores are done, her stepmother ordered sternly before marching out of the room. In the days that followed, the entire household revolved around preparations for the royal ball, especially the two stepsisters. From morning till night, Nina and Lena busied themselves preening, trying on dress after dress, and experimenting with countless hairstyles. They couldn't decide which outfit or look would make the most dazzling impression on the prince. Meanwhile, Cinderella was left to serve them, her own dreams of the ball fading like a distant star. Before they knew it, the big day finally arrived. The household buzzed with final preparations for their departure to the royal castle. Everyone was in high spirits, eagerly anticipating their chance to see the prince. Everyone, that is, except Cinderella. She had been moving about like a shadow all morning, her heart heavy with sadness. When her stepmother and stepsisters stepped proudly into the waiting carriage in the courtyard, Cinderella stood by, tears welling in her eyes. Cinderella, you'd better get straight to work and make sure everything is spotless when we return from the ball, her stepmother called out, already seated in the elegant carriage. You'd only embarrass yourself at the castle anyway. The horses, hitched and ready, neighed in unison as if bidding a final farewell. Then, with a jolt, they were off, galloping down the road toward the castle. Cinderella ran back into the house, overcome with sorrow. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she thought about the ball she would never see. Sitting by the window, she gazed longingly at the distant silhouette of the castle. Her heart ached with unfulfilled dreams. Unable to bear the sadness, she ran out into the garden, hoping to find solace among the flowers and trees. Then, out of nowhere, a gentle, familiar voice spoke. Startled, Cinderella turned and saw her fairy godmother standing before her. Her voice was warm and kind, just like Cinderella's late mother's had been. My dear child, don't cry, said the fairy godmother softly. If your heart truly wishes to go to the royal ball, then I will make it happen. But first, go to the garden and bring me a pumpkin. Cinderella, puzzled by what a pumpkin could possibly have to do with attending the ball, nonetheless obeyed. She hurried to the garden and selected the largest pumpkin she could find. Carrying it back to the courtyard, she set it down. In an instant, before her astonished eyes, the pumpkin transformed into a magnificent carriage, adorned with glittering gold. The fairy godmother then asked Cinderella, now, my dear, could you please fetch me those 4 little mice that have made their home in the pantry? Cinderella hurried to the pantry and soon returned, carrying a small basket with 4 squeaking gray mice inside. Place them on the ground, please, the fairy said kindly. She waved her magical wand, spoke a soft incantation, and in the blink of an eye, the mice transformed into 4 elegant, strong horses. Cinderella stood silently in awe, unable to believe the wonders unfolding before her eyes. There, my dear, this beautiful carriage will take you straight to the royal ball. Now, there's just one last little detail. The fairy godmother smiled warmly. Surely, you can't meet the prince dressed like this, can you? She said gently. At that moment, Cinderella's sooty rags shimmered and transformed into a breathtaking gown fit for a princess. Her feet were adorned with dazzling glass slippers that sparkled like diamonds. Cinderella gasped, hardly able to believe her own reflection. But before she could speak, the fairy godmother added one final instruction. "Remember, my dear, you must return home by the stroke of midnight. After that, the magic will fade away. Now, off you go, and waste no more time, hurry to the castle." Cinderella rode in the magical carriage, which sparkled like the stars themselves against the night sky. The mice, transformed into noble steeds, trotted proudly down the royal road toward the castle. Sitting in the carriage, Cinderella felt a mix of nervousness and excitement. She was wearing the most beautiful gown she could ever imagine, shimmering silver, delicately embroidered with crystals that caught every flicker of light from the torches and the stars above. On her feet were her crystal slippers, gleaming with every graceful movement. The carriage came to a halt in front of the majestic royal palace, glowing with the light of thousands of candles and magnificent crystal chandeliers. From the windows, music poured out, joyful and regal, yet foreign and unfamiliar to Cinderella, who had never seen or heard anything like it. As she stepped out of the carriage, the guards at the entrance and the palace staff turned their heads toward the mysterious beauty. A bit apprehensive but determined, Cinderella walked through the grand hallways of the palace, which led her to the towering doors of the ballroom. The immense hall was adorned with glittering chandeliers, golden details, and velvet drapes. The marble floor reflected the light so perfectly it seemed as if the entire room was enveloped in a soft, magical glow. On the far side of the ballroom stood the prince. Tall and poised in an elegant uniform trimmed with gold, he appeared weary and uninterested. Dozens of noblewomen had arrived at the ball, each eager to win his attention. The royal announcer tirelessly read one name after another from an endless list of eligible ladies, each vying to be the prince's chosen one. Yet, despite their beauty, none had managed to captivate him. Even the king, who yearned for his son to find love and secure the throne with a queen by his side, grew increasingly anxious. At that very moment, Cinderella's stepsisters were preening and parading before the prince. But then, his eyes fell upon Cinderella, and everything changed. The crowd, the music, even the burden of his duty to find a bride faded into insignificance. The prince moved toward her without hesitation, ignoring everyone else in the room. Cinderella, though awestruck by the grandeur and sudden attention, remained calm. Her natural humility and innocence set her apart from the other women who sought to capture the prince's favor. When he finally reached her, he extended his hand with a gentle smile. "May I have this dance?" he asked, his voice deep and warm. Cinderella nodded and placed her hand in his. The moment their hands touched, a spark seemed to pass through her, sending a strange yet wonderful sensation coursing through her body. The prince led her onto the dance floor, and the music, which had seemed to pause for a moment, began again, filling the hall with the soft, romantic notes of a waltz that felt as though it had been composed just for them. Cinderella and the prince danced alone at the center of the ballroom. Their movements were fluid and perfectly synchronized, as if they were made for each other. Every glance they exchanged was filled with admiration and curiosity. The prince couldn't take his eyes off Cinderella. Her smile was as radiant as sunlight, and her laughter rang like the softest chime. Cinderella felt as if she were in a dream. Though she had imagined moments of happiness all her life, nothing could have prepared her for this. The guests gathered around the dance floor, whispering among themselves about the mysterious beauty who had appeared seemingly out of nowhere. After their first dance, the prince escorted Cinderella to the terrace, where a breathtaking view of the royal gardens awaited them. The gardens shimmered under the moonlight, illuminated by thousands of lanterns. "I've never met anyone like you," the prince said, his voice filled with sincerity. "Will you tell me your name?" Cinderella hesitated, knowing she couldn't reveal her true identity. She offered a gentle smile and replied, "For now, I'll keep it a secret." Meanwhile, the grand clock continued its relentless countdown, and midnight was fast approaching. Lost in their conversation, Cinderella had nearly forgotten the fairy godmother's warning. But when she noticed the clock's hands nearing 12, panic began to rise within her. "I must go," she said abruptly, standing. The prince was bewildered. "Why?" "Please, stay," he implored. But Cinderella had made up her mind. She knew that if she didn't leave immediately, the magic would vanish, and everything she had experienced would be undone. She hurried back through the grand hall, her gown and crystal slippers shimmering with every step. Guests parted as she rushed past them, and the prince followed close behind, calling out, "Wait! Please!" As Cinderella descended the grand staircase of the palace, one of her glass slippers slipped from her foot. She hesitated for a moment but knew she couldn't turn back. She couldn't risk the magic breaking while still in full view of everyone. She kept running, making her way to the waiting carriage at the gates. The prince's aide stopped on the staircase, bending down to pick up the slipper. It was so delicate and exquisite that he couldn't imagine anyone but the mysterious dancer it belonged to. The prince stood frozen, watching the carriage disappear into the distance, a look of determination on his face. "I will find her," he vowed, "no matter what it takes." The carriage sped back home as Cinderella tried to catch her breath. As the clock struck midnight, the magic vanished. The pumpkin turned back into an ordinary pumpkin, and the mice reverted to their original form. Cinderella's gown transformed back into the tattered apron she had been wearing earlier. The only proof that the night hadn't been a dream was the second crystal slipper she still tightly held in her hands. Though everything had returned to normal, Cinderella wasn't sad. She knew she had experienced something she had only ever dreamed of, and she felt deep inside that this night was the beginning of something extraordinary. Fortunately, Cinderella made it back home just in time, so no one noticed anything out of the ordinary. Soon after Cinderella's return, her stepmother and stepsisters arrived home as well. Both were still buzzing with excitement from the ball, though neither had received even the slightest attention from the prince. Their conversations were filled with jealousy and anger toward the mysterious beauty who had captivated the entire ballroom, including the prince. Meanwhile, back at the royal palace, the prince could not stop thinking about Cinderella. His heart belonged only to her, but he had no idea who she was. The only thing he had left of her was the crystal slipper he had found on the stairs. He vowed to find her, no matter what. The king, equally thrilled by the idea of his son marrying, ordered that the slipper be tried on all the young women in the kingdom. Messengers set out with clear instructions: find the girl to whom this slipper belongs, no matter her background. News of the prince's decision spread quickly throughout the kingdom. Many girls hoped the slipper would fit them. Some even tried stretching or shortening their feet in hopes of fitting it. But the magical slipper was unique, and it would only fit one person. One morning, messengers arrived at Cinderella's house. Her stepmother noticed their arrival and immediately realized that this was her chance to elevate her family. She rushed to wake her daughters, eager to make sure they were among the first to try on the slipper. When Cinderella heard voices outside her house, her heart skipped a beat. She realized her moment had arrived. She wanted to step outside and reveal herself, but her stepmother stopped her. "Where do you think you're going?" she asked coldly. "This is not your time. Go back to your chores." But when she saw Cinderella's expression, her suspicion grew. Seizing the opportunity, she locked Cinderella in the attic to prevent her from meeting the royal messengers. Meanwhile, in the parlor, her stepsisters were unsuccessfully trying to fit the slipper. Lena was forcing her foot into it with all her might, while Nina was attempting to squeeze her foot in, but nothing worked. The messengers were about to leave when Cinderella finally appeared, having managed to escape from her confinement. "I would like to try on the slipper," she said with a smile. Her stepmother tried to protest, but the messengers wouldn't allow it. When they handed the slipper to Cinderella, the stepmother, in a last-ditch effort, tipped over the table. The slipper fell to the ground and shattered into a million pieces. For a moment, there was silence. The stepmother smiled triumphantly, but Cinderella remained calm. "You needn't worry," she said. "I have the other slipper." From her pocket, she pulled out the crystal slipper, which sparkled just like the first one. The messengers eagerly placed it on her foot, and to everyone's amazement, it fit perfectly. Immediately, the royal servants escorted Cinderella to the palace to meet the prince. He was overjoyed when he realized they had finally found the mysterious princess. It didn't take long before the grandest wedding the kingdom had ever seen was held at the palace. Cinderella became a true princess, beloved by all for her kind nature and compassionate heart. That's all for now, dear children. Upon a hill, not far from here, a goat with a bell would appear. Its gentle ring would softly say, "The story ends with the close of day. Good night, little ones, sweet dreams."